This is Bloomberg Businessweek with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Dying to get to this next story. It's one of the most read on the Bloomberg terminal, and you'll understand why in just a moment. It's about the growing legion of former spies, diplomats, and soldiers who are shifting into banking. Think James Bond or Homeland, and they're on Wall Street.
That's exactly how I'm thinking about it. We're talking about veterans of the CIA and U.S. Central Command, after all, including a former Navy admiral and more, all of whom financial firms are turning to help navigate wars, as well as a year packed with elections. Let's get to it with Bloomberg Wall Street reporter Sonali Basak, who writes all about it in the forthcoming issue of Businessweek magazine. Read the story now, though, on the Bloomberg terminal and at bloomberg.com/businessweek. She joins us here in New York City from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. It's a great story. It is a great story. I mean, it reads like a kind of like a thriller.
James Bond is my favorite movie.
So
I had to get
Which
into
one?
this one.
I mean, there's so many.
Oh, all of them.
Okay, all
Which
of them.
Bond do you like now? That's for another time.
Yeah, that is another time. But it is very James Bond-esque. What are they doing for these banks? Like, how are they helping these banks and their clients?
Yeah, it's worth getting into just for a quick second here on how we got into this in the first place. We found that there were banks that were hiring M16 agents and CIA agents and really very senior people. For example, Lazard had hired Bill McRaven, who had led counterterrorism operations for the United States. He was responsible for U.S. Special Ops, and he was responsible for overseeing the 2011 raid that killed Osama bin Laden. He's now working at an investment bank. And so we were wondering why these investment banks were hiring this talent and why this talent wanted to go work for an investment bank. So one person we talked to was Jamie Missick, who was a very senior official at the CIA, worked at the CIA for many years, former CEO of Kissinger Associates. And she, this isn't the first time she's done this. She's worked at Lehman Brothers before, for example, running sovereign risk. And the difference now between back then is currently the very current state of affairs in the world, where you're seeing all this geopolitical risk. Again, these folks have seen this before time and time again, but you are seeing the difference in the approach from the banks and asset managers, where you're seeing hiring of former intelligence officials, people who are former soldiers and diplomats, starting to jump very meaningfully in terms of numbers in hiring at these companies.
Don't you feel like you've seen, I think about some of the guests that we have on, and it's investment firms, but there's often former generals or military people.
There are investment firms that are exclusively, that were founded by former military folks and who exclusively hire folks from the military.
Right, but it makes sense, right? They can figure out, okay, what risks are serious or could turn into something much bigger. And, it's interesting, Sonali, I'm sure you're hearing it with the people that you're talking with. It's just the geopolitical risks this year, or even the U.S. risks and the worries about this election and also elections around the world. So there's a lot for these folks to deal with. Can I ask you, do they get paid a lot of money, or a lot more than they would in government service?
They do, by and large. And remember, this is not at the level of what we're talking about with a Missick or a McRaven, who are probably getting paid just as much as an investment banker would in the millions.
Okay.
Yeah. But
of dollars
on average, and remember, this is a trend that's very much expanding very quickly. We have said that 30% more finance positions were open requiring an intelligence background last year than the year before, so jumping quite meaningfully. But you could work for M16 for shy of $50,000, and you can easily take that and make more than $500,000. So this is kind of across the board here, moving from government to banking, how quickly your pay could jump.
Okay, but you also raised some issues about this, and one of those is brain drain, considering that these agencies pay a fraction of what these folks could earn in the private sector.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about the concern that the government has.
Well, what's interesting about this, let's talk about it from the talent perspective, because if you're working in a CIA position, and I was talking to Jamie Missick, the former Kissinger Associate CEO and CIA director as well, and she had really spoken about these stories about what it was like to get battle pay at the beginning, right? And what that felt like to be in these really dangerous situations, really on the ground, bunker life. Right. And I don't think you necessarily do the government job for the money, if you will. But at the same time, there is a point in your life where you might want to take that skill set where you can see around the corner and give those abilities to somebody else and help other people see
I can see that. Like if you're in your 20s, you're not married, you don't have kids. You're like, okay, I could go do this. I could go live in this place. I could be a spy. But people change later in life.
And there are real risks to those government jobs, right?
Yeah.
These, kind of being a spy on the ground for a various government. Having said that, though, so when they go to work for companies, it's not like they're Homeland, they're like Claire Danes, and they're out in the fields, right?
That was a good show. It
was a great show.
Have you seen Homeland? If you like James Bond, you got to watch all of it.
I'll give it a shot. I've never seen
it's
it.
on
I'm on the hunt for
Showtime.
new shows.
What's
You're
crazy,
going to love it, Sonali.
I remember one night watching 60 Minutes and then watching Homeland, and I'm like,
Which
oh
one
my
is
God.
which?
It was like real life crossing over into fiction. It was just really amazing, the reality of
I'm
that
so
show.
jealous that you get to watch Homeland for the first time. I mean, this is like tier 1 TV.
To your point about this not being Homeland, when I was having these conversations, I was
She's trying to get us back on
She's
track.
like, focus you two.
Well, I was so excited to talk to all the CIA agents.
Yeah.
I talked to bankers all day, right? So I was talking to all these spies, and they were kind of cool about it. They were like, listen, like, this is what we do, and, it's our job to prepare you for the conflict in the Middle East, or, the tensions brewing with China and the United States
It's like
and
being
Taiwan.
a consultant, right?
It is, and the reality is they'll see things that normal people don't. Like, for example, I was talking to somebody who had sat at an evening with Mike Pompeo the night before. And I was like, well, why was Mike Pompeo at this dinner with a bunch of private equity guys? And he said, well, one of the things that the private equity folks wanted was, thinking about their operations, everywhere around the Middle East, what they're invested in and how much risk is tied to it currently, and what new dollars they want to put in and how much risk is really involved. And somebody we talked to, a private equity titan that we talked to before, was Wes Edens, the founder of Fortress. He told us recently that he doesn't think most investors are pricing in that geopolitical risk when they're putting dollars to work. And this could be anywhere from Poland to Turkey that people are thinking about. And it might not even be your direct investment.
Right.
It might be a company that you're invested in that has a supply chain that traces back to somewhere that's closer to the epicenter of conflict.
Well, I think about today, we talked about the Bloomberg Big Take today, and it was about the Red Sea risk. And it seems like the longer this goes on, people are starting to tally up potential, if not current, economic costs. And maybe it hasn't made its way through the system, but the longer it goes on, it will.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And somebody like a Jamie Missick, her job there is to kind of catch those problems before it happens. So, and the morning of October 7th, she actually got a call from a corporate executive who, thanked her immediately for having moved their operations well before the conflict really boiled up.
It's concern. I mean, so if you think about a day in the life of a former spy or of a spy, you talk about this bunker life, being out in the field, the combat pay, worries about danger. How is that different from a day in the life of a former spy now working at a bank? Is this all from a desk, or are they doing stuff in the field?
They travel.
Yeah.
They definitely travel. They're meeting clients around the world. Remember, Lazard.
But is it more like business class and not on like an army plane?
Right, exactly. Private jets. Who knows really how she's
Just
getting
kidding.
there?
I'm speculating.
But, if you think about it, a lot of people don't realize this, but for a bank and for an asset manager, if you're BlackRock or if you're Schroders or if you're Goldman Sachs and particularly Lazard, some of your biggest, most influential clients in the world are governments. They're central banks, they're prime ministers, and it's figuring out how to manage a government balance sheet. And so this was something, Lazard has had a sovereign advisory practice for a very, very long time. Remember, they were part of the team that restructured New York in the 70s or after the 70s, right?
Right.
So when you think about their work around the world, they worked very closely with German companies in the wake of the outbreak of the war in Ukraine because of the energy crisis. So to have people who are thinking about these conflicts in a way that is so intense and deep and have a history with these conflicts,
right,
it gives them that edge when they're working with governments so that they can be prepared for these situations in the future.
Right, in terms of their depth of knowledge, right, on these situations. It's not superficial. They understand kind of the inner workings and ultimately maybe how it might play out longer term.
So not quite Homeland, but
go watch it. You
but
will
pretty
love
interesting.
It. You will love it. This is an incredible story, as we said. It's among the most read on the Bloomberg terminal and the new issue of Bloomberg Businessweek on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com. Really cool stuff. As always, Sonali Basak, thank you so much. Bloomberg Wall Street reporter.